Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are viewing this. I want to apologize ahead of time that you'll be looking at my ugly mug longer than usual, but this is going to be a rather lengthy message, but I feel that all of the information is relevant. I found an article from Newsweek dated December 18th, 2023, and the title of the article was Donald Trump proposes deploying thousands of troops on U.S. soil. The article begins. Donald Trump said he plans to have federal law enforcement protect the southern border and relocate troops stationed overseas. In a speech at a campaign rally in Reno, Nevada on Sunday, the former president said he wants to move employees at agencies such as the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives to help control what Trump called an invasion at the U.S.-Mexico border. The hardline immigration remarks from Trump came after he was condemned by the White House and others for echoing rhetoric of Nazi leader Adolf Hitler after he claimed during a rally in New Hampshire on Saturday that immigrants are poisoning the blood of the United States. The comments also came after Trump, the frontrunner in the 2024 GOP presidential primary, recently said that he'll only act as a dictator on day one if he returns to the White House. He himself says that he's going to be a dictator. That's comforting. I will shift massive portions of federal law enforcement to immigration enforcement, including parts of the DEA, ATF, FBI, and DHS, Trump said in Reno. And I will make clear that we must use any and all resources needed to stop the invasion of our country, including moving thousands of troops currently stationed overseas in countries that don't like us. They laugh at our current president. They think he's a fool and we shouldn't be there. We have to protect our own borders first. Before we defend the borders of foreign countries, we have to get our act together. We have to be able to do it for ourselves. The remarks came days after Rolling Stone, cited unnamed sources, reported that Trump is hoping to deploy between 100,000 and 300,000 U.S. troops to the southern border if he wins the election, as he aims to ramp up his immigration policies during a second term. In October 2018, Trump announced that he would send more than 5,200 troops to the southern border in Texas, California, and Arizona to bolster the defense and stop a migrant caravan. Trump previously hinted that he would invoke the Insurrection Act to allow him to use essentially military personnel to act as law enforcement in the U.S., although it is unclear if it would be a clamp down on illegal migrants crossing. The Insurrection Act allows President to call on reserve or active duty military units to respond to civil unrest in the U.S. The problem with the Insurrection Act is that it is not the carefully crafted break glass in case of emergency kind of tool that it should be, Joseph Nunn, a counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice, told Rolling Stone. Instead, the Insurrection Act gives essentially unlimited discretion to the president to use the military as a domestic police force. Newsweek has reached out to Trump's office via email for comment. Trump has said he would act as dictator if reelected president on his first day to implement some of his policies, including building a wall on the southern border. Now, initially, all of that might sound good, but I want you to think about this. Remember the frog in the pot of water analogy? If you place a frog in a pot of boiling water, it would immediately jump out. But if you placed the frog in a pot of cool water and slowly turned up the heat, the frog wouldn't even understand what was going on, and eventually it would be boiled to death. Consider this: the Patriot Act of 2001. It was passed into law to improve the abilities of U.S. law enforcement to detect and deter terrorism. This was signed into law by then President George W. Bush on October 26, 2001, shortly after the tragedy of September 11, 2001. The Patriot Act 2. It was passed into law to strengthen the U.S. Department of Justice so that it can better detect and disrupt terrorist threats, and it also gives law enforcement new tools to combat threats. This was signed into law by then President George W. Bush on March 9, 2006. Then we have the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978. It established procedures for the physical and electronic surveillance and collection of foreign intelligence information between foreign powers and agents of foreign powers suspected of espionage or terrorism. However, while FISA primarily targets foreign agents, its provisions have been interrupted. Its provisions have been interpreted to allow surveillance of U.S. citizens in certain circumstances. And we know that not too long ago, we started seeing the increase of surveillance of U.S. citizens, even without cause. The PRISM program, a part of FISA, primarily targets foreign agents. Its provisions have been interpreted to allow surveillance of U.S. citizens in certain circumstances. Another program to conduct surveillance on Americans. The Insurrection Act, originally enacted in 1792, the law grants the president the authority to deploy the U.S. military domestically and use it against Americans under certain conditions. While there are rare circumstances in which such authority might be necessary, the law, which has not been meaningfully updated in over 150 years, is dangerously overbroad, and ripe for abuse. Now, who do you think is going to set these certain conditions? Well, of course, it would be the president, right? And with executive powers, he could circumvent Congress. These policies collectively shape the framework under which the U.S. government can conduct surveillance on its citizens, balancing national security interests with private rights. We are quickly losing all of our rights, just in case you didn't know that. With all of this in mind, consider what could happen if Donald Trump is placed in the White House for a second term and actually deploys thousands of U.S. troops along the southern border. The first issue is a little thing called the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. This act is a United States federal law enacted to prevent the military from becoming a tool for law enforcement, ensuring a clear separation between military and civilian roles. It specifically prohibits the use of the U.S. Army and Air Force to perform the task of civilian law enforcement unless explicitly authorized by the Constitution or an act of Congress. Of course, if Trump gets back into office and the Republicans take both the House and the Senate, how difficult do you think it would be to pass, these authorizations to be used for other purposes? If reelected, President Trump would have at his disposal the U.S. National Guard, whose main purpose is defending the U.S. homeland, particularly through the Air National Guard, which provides air defense capabilities. Because he has the National Guard, he shouldn't need U.S. troops on U.S. soil. The U.S. government has used military personnel for domestic police actions. Some of these actions include Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957. Then President Dwight D. Eisenhower deployed the 101st Airborne Division to enforce school desegregation. Los Angeles riots, 1992. Then President George H.W. Bush invoked the Insurrection Act to deploy federal troops to help restore order after the Rodney King verdict. Hurricane Katrina, 2005. Then President George W. Bush deployed to assist in disaster response, but under the command of state National Guard forces, not directly for law enforcement. These instances show that while the military's involvement in domestic law enforcement is legally restricted, it has occurred under specific circumstances. What other reasons could President Trump deploy U.S. troops on the streets of America? A future pandemic or public health emergencies. After all, in a severe public health crisis, such as a highly contagious and deadly disease outbreak, troops could be deployed to enforce quarantines, build medical facilities, or distribute supplies. I don't know if you've been paying attention, but they've been talking about the reemergence of CV-19 and the recent declaration of a global emergency concerning Mpox. Widespread riots or civil disorder. If civil unrest becomes widespread and threatens the public safety beyond the capacity of local law enforcement, the president might deploy troops under the Insurrection Act to restore order. Should another pandemic be declared and forced wearing a mask, social distancing, vaccination mandates, businesses locked down, etc. be ordered, many have already said that they will not comply. And people are really pushing that do not comply. Domestic terrorism. If a significant domestic terrorist threat or attack occurs within the U.S., troops could be deployed to secure critical infrastructure, protect public safety, and respond to the threat. Now, what you have to keep in mind is this is a current list of the some of the organizations and people groups considered domestic terrorists by the U.S. government. White supremacist and neo-Nazi groups, for example, the Ku Klux Klan, the Aryan Nations. Their ideology, they believe in white supremacy, promoting racism and anti-Semitism, and the dislike of people from other countries. They often advocate for violence against minorities and the overthrow of the U.S. government. Anti-government extremists. Examples: Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, sovereign citizens. How dare you claim that you're a sovereign citizen? Their ideology. They are characterized by a deep mistrust of the U.S. government, often viewing it as illegitimate or tyrannical. They may resist government authority and sometimes engage in violent actions to promote their beliefs. Militia groups, such as Wolverine Watchmen, up in Michigan. Their ideology. Militia groups are heavily armed and often believe in the necessity of a violent revolution or civil war to protect their interpretation of constitutional rights. Constitutional rights. I, state your name, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. This would include a runaway tyrannical government. By placing militia groups on the list of domestic terrorists, the government has forgotten what the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution states. Quote, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, unquote. A well-regulated militia would be a group of citizens who are well-trained, disciplined, and capable of performing military duties effectively. It implies regular training and a certain level of proficiency in the use of arms and tactics. Militias were seen as a defense against tyranny, whether from a foreign invader or a potentially oppressive government. And yet, the U.S. government has placed militias on, the terrorist list. Anti-abortion extremists. For example, the Army of God. Their ideology. The These groups are vehemently opposed to abortion and have engaged in acts of violence against abortion providers, clinics, and supporters. I agree. Against such acts, law enforcement intervention is necessary. However, here are some headlines of people being arrested just for praying or holding a sign outside of an abortion clinic. From the Daily Express. Isabel Vaughn Spruce was arrested in November 2022 for silently praying within an abortion clinic. Silently praying. You know that they're developing ways for the government to be able to actually read your thoughts. From Fox News, a woman and her colleague were arrested for praying outside abortion clinic. A Catholic pro-life activist, Brennan, and her colleague David were arrested outside the Causeway Hospital in Coleraine, Northern Ireland in October 2023. Brennan was praying and had brought a sign which called for others to pray and to end abortion. And from Fox News, retired British woman on trial for holding sign offering to talk to women considering abortion. Livia Tosicki Bolt held a sign that read, "Here to talk if you want," near an abortion facility in Bournemouth, England, which prompted several individuals to approach her to discuss issues they were facing in their lives, according to Alliance Defending Freedom UK. You can't even stand up for the rights of the unborn. They think that you're an extremist, right? It's a bad thing for you to pray for unborn babies. It's a bad thing for you to pray for the women that are entering into these slaughterhouses. Don't want to get me started on this topic. Anyway, the next one, religiously motivated extremists. For example, Christian Identity Movement. Their ideology. Some groups are motivated by religious beliefs that include elements of extremism, often combining religion with racial or anti-government ideologies. Yes, let's remember the anti-abortion extremists who are such horrible people for praying for those seeking an abortion and for the unborn baby. You get the point. President Trump could deploy U.S. troops to the southern border to stop the massive number of illegal immigrants from pouring over the border. But what could be next? Just like the frog in the pot, he could begin with something that would be accepted by most, and as time passed by, he could begin to use troops in police actions against a perceived threat. Before you know it, things could quickly spin out of control. Remember the Boston Marathon bombing on April 15th, 2013? The bombing led to a massive manhunt, which involved a lockdown of the Boston metropolitan area. Boston Police Department and surrounding police departments played a significant role in the door-to-door search, especially in Watertown, where the suspects were believed to be hiding. Military police units and specialized SWAT teams were deployed. This included assets from the Massachusetts State Police, Boston SWAT teams, and tactical units from other federal agencies. There were instances where law enforcement, including local police, military police units, and specialized SWAT teams, forcefully entered homes in Watertown to search for the suspects. Some of these searches involved law assets forcibly entering the homes of U.S. citizens without any type of warrant. At one time, there were videos showing the military police units and SWAT teams going up and down streets, screaming at people to get inside, and with weapons at the ready, force their way into multiple homes. This governmental overreach finally ended on April 19th when the last suspect was apprehended. If President Trump decides he wants to deploy U.S. troops to the southern border, it should first be approved by Congress, and specific limitations should be attached to that mission only. Things could quickly spin out of control. It could start with something good to prevent the illegal immigrants coming across the southern border. But again, if that is allowed, what's to prevent Trump from taking a little more and a little more and a little more, right? They want an inch, they want a mile, whatever that saying is. You know what I'm saying. He could begin to do things which would make it even worse than what it already is. I hope you have a great thing. Have a great day, and think about these things because they're important to consider.